Ella Sales, thank you for talking with us. I look forward to hearing about you and your experience with your son and what you and Teresa were hoping for, and ultimately how he's doing now. And any advice you can give someone who's looking for a place for their son or daughter, and for people who make decisions about building places like this.
Okay. As you heard, my name's Eliseo Smith. I'm 83 years old, and I have been involved with mental illness since way back when my son started to develop signs of behavioral problems while in school. Going back then, my son is adopted. We did not know his background at all, the family background. But as he grew a little older and acclimated with my family, we found out that his mother was a young lady that was a model. And in order to maintain the model figure, she had been addicted to medications, self-medicated also. So needless to say, when we found this out, now we realized why he cried practically a whole year after we got him after 3 months home. He was actually addicted. And finally, when his addiction was over with, and he kind of got rid of all the mental, not the mental, but the medicine or drugs within his system, he started to level off and kind of get acclimated with my family. Finally, after a few years, when he was in junior high, he started to act out, was being kicked out of the class and put in the hallway, but nothing was being done in reference to find out what was his problem with behavior. He was an intelligent young man. He didn't need to hear some of the stuff that the teachers were teaching, but nevertheless, he maintained fairly good grades without studying. He did behave bad, but that he was never put through the special education process or diagnostic procedures to find out what was the reason for his behavior. Going forward, at the age of 16, he dropped out of school. We were, of course, parents that got mad. We were disappointed. But on the other hand, he proved us that he didn't need high school. He went the next day to San Antonio College, took the GED exam and passed it with flying colors. So with that in mind, let's go forward. He continued to go to school, college, spent only 1 or 2 semesters, and then started getting in with the wrong crowd. Drugs were involved. Then we became involved with Texas Rehabilitation Commission, which I encouraged him because I was a rehab counselor. I was not his counselor, but I referred him to a counselor that dealt with behavioral problems and addicted people. So after evaluating him, he was given a course in audio engineering, which is disc jockey, which he really enjoyed. He started, to me, that was the wrong field because he would be involved with raves and people of that sort, which are pretty involved with drugs, which he was involved with before he got rehabilitated to that point. He continued playing, making raves, made good money. That was not the problem. The problem was the drugs. People that went to the graves, one time he had a gig that cost him over $10,000 just to get disc jockeys from all over the country here in San Antonio rent a place to a warehouse to provide this with the lights and everything else. All of that came out of his pocket, by also paying room and board for the disc jockeys that came from out of town. He confided on some friends to be at the door and taking in the money, and he was robbed. Everything went down to pot.
And that caused him to
That caused
become.
him to return back, well, really regress further into the drug scene.
Oh, so at that time he did not have a mental illness diagnosis.
No, he became a drug addict, or that was the
Uh-huh.
diagnosis that was provided.
Right.
But to me, that was a wrong diagnosis because he was self-medicating rather than being provided with the right diagnosis and the right medication for it.
When did you discover, or when did you finally get a diagnosis that had to do with his mental illness?
We got the diagnosis one time when he was put in jail. We went over in front of the judge, and I intervened in that I asked the court to have my son tested
Mm-hmm.
to see what was the reason for his behavior.
How old was he at that time?
At that time, he was about 18, 19 years old.
And what did they decide was his mental
They
illness?
decided that he had, first it was a behavioral problem, personality. And then when they dug in a little bit further in the diagnostic process, they found out that yes, of course, the diagnosis of drugs was there, but they found out that his biggest problem was he was schizoaffective personality.
Okay.
So that caused him to have the different ups and downs in his behavior.
Was he treated for that at the time?
At that time, the judge did not put him in jail, provided us with the referral to the Center for Healthcare Services, which at that time we proceeded with that order. He was given some treatment, and of course, he lived with us at home. We didn't have a place for him at the time, but as he got older, the treatment became kind of stagnant because it was not, he did not have the counseling that needed to be done with the treatment.
So he got the medication, but not the therapy.
Not the therapy, correct.
And did you find that he was getting better, or was he kind of staying the same with the same sort of challenges?
He stayed the same. I mean, he leveled off at first because he started the medication, and that helped him lay off some of the drugs and so on. But then he got into a plateau that the behavior came back. Medication was not working. He went to see his counselor. They discussed his situation with the psychiatrist, and yet they changed. They've met here and there, but it was not getting the job done.
As you look back on that period of time now, what advice would you give parents who are kind of going through this, where they've identified there's a problem, they've started some treatment, doesn't seem to be working right, and all of a sudden you find yourself shopping around for good treatment? Now that you look back on it, what would you say to people that are going to go through this?
Well, it's very hard because at the present time, I don't see the Center for Healthcare Services or any treatment facility out there unless it's an in-house hospital or
Inpatient.
Inpatient, correct.
Yeah.
Facility where he will be confined and receiving the
24-hour care.
24-hour care, not only the medical care, but the counseling that goes with it.
Mm-hmm.
the trying to make him realize the whys and hows and whens this behavior starts and doesn't end.
At what point did it become time for him to live on his own?
Well,
How did we end up at?
he ended up finding a place after he was put in prison. And the irony of things is when he went to prison, instead of progressing, he regressed. Because when he went, they didn't provide him with meds. So he started acting out, getting in trouble, fighting and whatever, which he was a good fighter. He had had karate training before, so he did some bad things in prison for that. But nevertheless, they, instead of treating him or sending him, giving him medication, he was put in isolation, which got him worse. He spent 9 years in prison. All during that time, we would make trips to the prison unit. Sometimes we would be able to see him. We would be notified that he was an agent because he was in solitary. And he was just getting further and further worse. Finally, right before he got out, after 9 years, he was diagnosed in prison, and they sent him with a handful of pills out into the community. Gave him a check, money for and a bus ticket, sent down here, ended up at 3 o'clock in the morning in San Antonio with no place to go. The parents, which is me and my wife, Teresa, did not know he was coming. So here we get this call in the morning, and he says he's here, and he has a note of where to go, which was the Salvation Army. When he got here, he was supposed to go to the Salvation Army. Of course, at that time, Salvation Army, and they still do this, they have restrictions and time frames for them to go in and be admitted and stay in and be able to get a bed and things like that.
So he's back. When do you guys realize, or when does he realize he needs a place to stay?
Well, as soon as he got back, he knew he didn't have a place to stay. We were not going to accept him back at the house because of the problems he had caused us, and cost himself actually, not because we didn't love him or anything like that. It's because he cost himself and put a big damper in my wife and the rest of the children.
Well, it's kind of stressful.
Very stressful. So we found a really good social worker at Salvation Army who gave us the first referral for housing. I cannot remember the name of the housing project or the housing program, but it was a private company that had a unit of so many apartments or a house with so many bedrooms with 2 or 3 clients within each bedroom, and they would provide the housing and meal, their breakfast and an evening meal, which was ideal. So we were able to put him in one of those.
How come he didn't stay there for the rest of his life?
Because this became somewhat temporary, because they were not established for that type of residency. It was like a transition program.
Right.
But there was no treatment there. So the treatment was supposed to be done and was done by psychiatrists at the state hospital, which once he became stable, we were able to get him Medicaid transportation would take him to the hospital.
To his
to the state hospital to get treatment, get counseling, therapy by psychiatrists, not only a counselor. He was a psychiatrist and a PhD psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
So that stabilized him somewhat. And he would go and come. First, I would take him to get acclimated with the route to go
Mm-hmm.
and come. Then I got him involved with the Medicaid transportation.
May I ask you this? Were they able to give him a consistent day and time to be there for this treatment so he could get used to a routine?
Yes, it was a weekly schedule at a certain time.
Mm-hmm.
And that helped because we had to schedule the transportation ahead of schedule.
I'm going to move us on to Urban Alliance, to the apartments, to, Viceroy Village, Monarch, and of course, Regal Village, where he lives. And how did he end up there?
Well, the family, started looking around for stabilization, a more stable unit, because the housing that he was in, there were 3 or 4 people within. They were all had mental problems, and there were several times that they got into fights. And one night he was sleeping, and this guy came in and broke his nose while sleeping without any care. So that caused us to, we were moving around different houses. Different houses were more interested in just taking their social security than what they were providing.
May I ask?
But at that time.
Yeah, may I ask? Some folks have said that having roommates, especially those who also have a mental illness, creates a kind of a reaction to each other. That there is some sense that if you can have your own place, you might fare better over time. Do you think that's true?
Yes, I do, because not every mentally ill person has the same problem. There are different stages of mental illness, different reasons for mental illness. So there are conflicts in that when they flare up, their behavior flares up, there are different behaviors that they don't correlate to each other. And
It affects each other.
It affects each other, it affects problems, and either they start being nasty to each other, fighting and so on, that they are kicked out of the facilities, which has happened to my son. And this happened while in Urban Alliance.
Yeah, I understand from what you shared with me that he first lived at Monarch Place.
Correct, and that's what I was
How long
needing.
did he live there?
Oh, he lived at, I presume, he lived there a couple of 2-3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a nice place. That was one of the best places that he's ever lived in, because he had his own apartment.
Mm-hmm.
The only problem was that next to him was a client or a patient or a member of the same complex, resident there, that had also mental illness. And that his mental illness was because of different things. And he was involved with drugs, who in turn introduced my son to this buddy of his, which in turn they became friends, and the friendship became more involved, and they started stealing from my son, the microwave and things like that.
So he was taken advantage of.
Yes, but because he was getting drugs.
Oh, because he was becoming once again a drug user.
Yes.
Okay. So he had to leave there.
Well, he was forced to leave. Let me put it this way: he was kicked out. But let me say something about Urban Alliance and Regal and Monarch. Not being prejudiced in any way, I still believe they're one of the best places in town. Reason being that the management is very empathetic. The management, and I'm talking not only the manager of the facility, but management overall, the owner or manager of the whole management company, is very empathetic and very knowledgeable, has become very knowledgeable in the mental cases.
Could you share a little bit about Steve Colella
Steve Colella, the owner manager of the Urban Alliance complexes, which is the 3 housing projects. He's a young man that is easy to talk to, young man that is willing to make changes, is a young man that cares about people. He not only cares about your individual patient or member, but cares about everybody within the housing unit. He tries to accommodate everybody in every which way. By doing that, by knowing that, he accommodates the managers of the facilities by getting managers that are empathetic, that are willing to learn about the mental illness, and they really care and participate within the unit. They're not just managers to either accept or kick out. They're managers to assist and help when there is a crisis, when there is a problem, and whether it's day or night, they're there.
I understand that they're trained by NAMI in the area of mental health, mental illness. I know that they're apartment managers and they have certifications for those things, but I understand also that a NAMI is a place where they go to learn about mental health, mental illness.
Yes, that's very true. When I said they were involved, they take, I want to say that, they take all the clients that are able to go to the NAMI meetings, at which time the NAMI meetings talk about different disabilities, different treatments, different so on and so forth, and different ways to handle the patients and members of the facilities. And the managers are able to discuss this with NAMI personnel, which NAMI in turn provides some training.
Family to family, I
Family
believe.
to family, and at that training, some managers go, but they're also provide some private training too.
Mm-hmm.
And the managers are willing to go and get knowledgeable about the different behaviors. So that is one of the reasons that I believe that
That it's successful?
that they are very well trained, they're empathetic and willing to be involved with each patient or client and become successful.
Mm.
My son, like I mentioned, he lived there 3 months. He got involved with drugs. The manager of the apartment complex, not the overall manager, not Steve Colella, tried very hard to maintain and counsel with my son to stay clear of what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
He was given a reprimand several times, but never kicked out. Finally, after just, running the gamut of pardons, Steve was brought in. He came and talked to me and my wife and my son and the manager, all of us in front, and gave us an ultimatum that he was to follow certain procedures and attitudes and stay there. And if he didn't, he was going to be kicked out. Well, that happened because my son didn't follow through. And when that happened, even Mr. Colella cried because he didn't want to do it.
Okay, so he's out. Now he's back in.
Yes.
So how'd that happen?
That's a beautiful story. When he got out, I got involved with other different private housing projects that they say they help, the disabled and so on and so forth. But they're only all interested in the money from Social Security. And we were involved with two or three of them. Finally, we found Endeavors, and Endeavors provided housing, and they had a group in which the members would cook and participate in chores and things like that.
Fairweather Lodge?
Fairweather Lodge, yes, no,
No, something else.
no.
Some other kind of program.
It was, I don't know if it was I don't believe it was Fairweather Lodge.
But it was kind of a group sort of
It was a group homes in which they had three or four for males and three or four for females.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, they were really left alone.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have people with mental illness there again, together, different types, and nobody teaches them anything. They kind of learn from each other how to cook, and some people don't like what they cook, and so on and so forth. And there's discussions and agreements and disagreements. So
It wasn't working.
it didn't work.
Okay.
And finally, one New Year's time, my son went out, and I guess they were tired of him. He came home in the middle of about 10, 11 o'clock. His apartment, the house was changed locks, and nobody would open the apartment for him, so he slept in the porch, and it was 30-degree weather outside.
Yeah.
That was the last straw. I went back to Mr. Colella because I had heard that there was a vacancy at Regal. And I asked him if there was any possibility that he would accept my son back. And he, of course, asked me how his behavior was, and I told him that he was under treatment and he was being treated by a private psychiatrist at that time, and he was very, very well established, very calm and collected. He followed the regimen pretty well, and I always took him to the counseling sessions for the psychiatrist, which in turn I would be admitted and with him, and we discussed the pros and the cons of what was his behavior, and my son was willing for me to be there to listen to what he said and what wasn't said. So the psychiatrist moved on. We left town, and he was left without a psychiatrist. So I, in turn, right before the psychiatrist left, I was able to get him at Regal.
Mm-hmm.
And he established his own apartment, and it is great there. The managers have been pretty accepting. The members of the community have accepted him for his behavior, and that is his little home.
How long has he been there?
He's been there about 6, 7, 8 years, something like that.
Great.
And he calls his home. He comes to my house and get-togethers, and after a couple of hours, he's ready. He says, "Let me take me home." He's ready. He's ready to go home.
Yeah.
And he's.
How far away from here is Regal Village? A couple of miles? 4 or 5
From my
miles?
house, Regal Village is approximately 5 miles.
Would you say that it is worth the city of San Antonio's time and effort to put more of these kinds of apartments around the city where they can be near family?
Yes, that would be nice. The only way that, the city and the federal government provide housing, which is great. But if the city is going to provide housing for the disabled, especially the mentally disabled, I would say that closer to family would be good, but it depends on the unit. Because you don't want the member to depend on family more than on the than on the apartment complex and the family he's establishing there.
So not too close.
No, not too far, not too close, but close enough for medical care, treatment.
And occasionally to visit.
And occasional to visit, yes.
Okay.
That. Because you don't want them to drop into your house all of a sudden and you're not expecting them.
Mm-hmm.
Because you might have plans and things like that. But the only reason that, or way that I believe it would work, is if the city would provide housing that would, like I mentioned, close but not too far, but the management would be able to provide, be trained and be empathetic for the type of clientele that's going to live and reside there. They need to be involved, get involved with the clients, try to help them when there's a little crisis, resolve the issues before it becomes a mountain.
That's a very good point. Currently, the affordable housing process is large unit apartments. Generally, these apartments are built to meet retail demands, which means they don't cluster one bedrooms, they don't cluster two bedrooms. They just sort of do like 3 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 1 bedroom, sort of like that. And generally, they adopt a staggered, what we call they place people individually into apartments depending on availability, rather than clustering them to create a sense of community.
Okay.
Now, Center for Healthcare does at Alizon Apache. But what's your thought about that? I mean,
well,
about community.
The community is very important, in my opinion, because they create a family within themselves. They go to meetings within themselves. The management will call a meeting or will have a birthday party for, set a date for all the birthdays for this month or whatever. Create a little gathering so that they can come get together and meet each other and eat together in the same tables and things like that. Whereas in the apartments by themselves, they're themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And they can invite somebody, but that doesn't happen much.
Are you worried that they might be being segregated?
In my opinion, yes.
Are you worried that?
They can be segregated. It depends on management. Depends on the allotments of apartments.
Well, what I meant was that they're being denied access to
housing,
main existence amongst people who are not mentally ill.
I think so. Yes.
I mean, do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
I believe that the clients themselves already know that people notice that they're different. Okay.
So having these little community things is a good thing?
Yes, it's a good thing.
Okay.
The segregation in that respect, yes, because they know their capabilities, they know their problems. They find out, hey, I didn't see Joe, I didn't see Mary. Where is she? What happened? Did she have a crisis? And they start.
They check on each other.
They check on each other. They start worrying. I mean, like families, And to me, if they don't see nobody, they'll go to the manager. Manager, what happened? I saw the ambulance last night. I saw a policeman last night.
Mm-hmm. Because they know each other.
Because they know each other and they're interested. They don't want anything to happen to them.
We're just about at that time. So, is there anything else you'd like to share to let people know who make decisions about this kind of housing?
I would like to make one thing clear. I belonged to Urban Alliance many years ago. By many, I was a member for, I would say, 10, 12 years. I was involved in talking to the managers. I was involved talking to Mr. Colella, who is the owner of the management company, and advise him of my things that I noticed were being right or wrong, things that needed to be done. For example, Monarch was one of the first units built. It was built like a motel. Yes, they had an air conditioner, but it was an air conditioner in the living room, like a motel. The bedroom didn't have air conditioning. Okay, they had a window unit that cooled the living room and somewhat the kitchen area. The bedroom was hot, no fan, and the bathroom, whatever. We were successful in talking to Mr. Colella, and we applied for a grant. We were able to organize a committee, got contracts, got money from the federal government, and we got central air and central heat for all the units.
Excellent.
Not only Monarch, but we started with Monarch. We ended up going to Viceroy and Regal also, but Regal was I think, more accessible to it because it was in the newer apartment.
Mm-hmm.
So the little things like that helped a lot. New refrigerators. The refrigerators I had were the old type that you had to put water in the freezer to get ice.
Yeah.
Now it would freeze up, and what happened? All the food would be cluttered, and they wouldn't close, and the food would,
Yeah.
So we got it up to par.
If I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is that whatever is built, the people that live there and their families need the opportunity to have input and see changes made when necessary.
Correct. That's exactly what I'm saying. Because we did, as a member of River Alliance, we got input from family members. We had meetings with them, which I believe you guys are doing now to find out what's going on. And that's one of the best things you can do.
Yeah.
Get involved.
I want to thank you very much. Appreciate it.